So here we are in 2024, and I still have a rat's nest of cables in everywhere I am. No matter where I go in my home, there's like piles of coils of cables, USB cables, random computer cables for computer connectivity that I don't even think I have computers that support anymore. Line level audio cables, instrument level audio cables, speaker level audio cables, balanced or unbalanced line level cables. We did that too. Boxes and boxes of cables and connectors. Audio snakes, like multi-channel audio snakes. Extension cords. Power strips.
I'm so tired of cables. They're exhausting. I was looking at a bunch of intertangled cables the other day, and I was wondering if there's like a universal force that like entangles cables. And I'm like, oh, that feels like order and chaos. But it feels specifically like if there's a cord or something cord-like, it tries to tangle with something else, and I'm like, this just feels like gravity, but for cables.
Yeah, no,
It's
no,
like they're
seriously.
attracted to each other.
Why does the universe look at me like that? Like I seriously will coil a cable, the over under method, so that it can spring loose and supposedly not tangle, and then tie it off at the end, so it like really shouldn't get bound up with anything because it's bound up to itself, and somehow. I mean, somehow, after I put a stack of these with each other, when I go to get one out of it, I end up picking up like three or four of them. I can grab one portion of wire between index and thumb, and I'll end up grabbing like, at least two cables. And the weirdest is when I do that with like USB cables. And you'd think USB cables would have similar properties as like an audio cable because the audio cables just grab each other somehow. But no, somehow the USB cables weave with each other into some kind of weird cable braid. Like I can't even explain that. That's like USB quantum entanglement.
Yeah, it's really crazy. I it there are some times when I feel like I'm removing technology gradually because of things like that. It's like I just can't. There's a limit to things, and I realize I'm like getting heavy into radio control, and I'm like, oh shit, there's no wires. That's kind of funny. Like,
Oh,
I've been into radio control stuff for a while, but I've been getting more heavy into it, and I think there is like it's almost like moving backwards or going back and revisiting technology that wasn't properly explored and getting into it more in depth and then learning, how to all the different things about radio like frequencies concerning controlling vehicles and shit like that cuz it's like it's important when you have more than one vehicle to know like what's interference, like what's and all these other things. So on that, it has been fun to explore the older tech, but at the same time, it's like I feel like it's because everything is trying to over engineer itself to the point where I'm like, I just want a differential and a fucking some wheels and the controls, and then that's where like I I think about a lot of video games, and the best games remove the friction of the controller between the person and what they're trying to do on the screen. And it's like that's where something that's as simple as radio control is basically like throttle and steering. And so when you get these really simple interfaces, it removes a lot of the thought and you can just intuitively be in touch with something. Whereas everything being increasingly over engineered, it's like there's just a constant friction between the person and the goal. And that's where I'm like, increasingly, I move away from those friction points. And it's like a more pleasant life.
I was just looking at this power block. Basically, it's a power strip, but it's oriented vertically into this kind of cylindrical tower. It's a tower of power. That's a good way to put it. So it's got 6 USB ports and three uh, power outlets, and no, I'm sorry, four power outlets, and all four power outlets are occupied. Two of which by USB adapters, which is kind of odd, but whatever. All of the USB ports are full. One is charging a mouse, another one's powering a lamp, and the rest are just cables that go to other devices. There are 8 USB cords coming out of this thing right now. That's ridiculous.
Well, and it's only there because some fucking asshole wanted to charge for it. If it weren't for that person, everything would be wireless at this point, and we'd be able to just pull power out of the air. But because you can't meter it,
Well, there's like a USB C, a USB A mini type, a lightning cable, another lightning cable, a special battery charger, a mouse, a LED magnifying desk lamp thing, another LED lamp. Um, there's something plugged into the back of it that's going under the desk. I only have two cables that have a common connector to devices. Everything else is like a specialized cable. I'm sure that somebody else has already had this, like, you know, mental brick wall they walked into here. But why do I have so many cables? Why are there so many connector types now? We've had USB ports for like what, 2 decades now? Practically, it feels like. When was the first USB port?
and granted, they have increased the speeds dramatically.
1996.
Um, and it's like,
30 years. We've had USB ports for 30 years and they can't standardize this thing still.
well, it's like if they increase the speed dramatically enough to necessitate a change, that's one thing, but that's not always been the case. And so, especially when you look at proprietary shit where they're like, oh, we're going to use a firewire or something and we're going to use our own. It's like, well, this is kind of the same issue with charging
Firewire is a
for
very unique situation,
vehicles.
though, because that was an attempt at parallel processing. Because those had very special cables, very expensive special cables, where all the wires were like the exact same length down to, like, the millimeter or sub millimeter, and it was critical for data handling. But that's a very special case. Like,
Yeah, but that's a terrible
it's
way to approach
yeah, because
things.
parallel computing itself, or parallel processing of, like, at IO, is actually a terrible idea because it relies on such specialized cables. Like,
Yeah.
if the failure point is a stupid expensive, and I'm pretty sure that most people don't even remember how much something like a serial port versus a parallel port, because we're talking about really old connectivity. But the difference in cost between those cables is, like, you can probably get 10 to 20 serial port cables for the price of a single parallel port cable. And that parallel port cable couldn't bend the way that you can bend a normal cable, because it would it would stretch one of those wires and then everything would go out of whack. I think it's easy to forget how good we have it now. Like, one USB cable can handle more data than any of those parallel cables ever could. Like, we can send SCSI over
Well,
USB now.
and this gets to another issue of like excessive capacity when it's not um when someone doesn't work to gain the excess capacity, and sometimes even when they do, that excess often ends up turning into inefficiencies when approaching planning. And so whether it's with money or resources, when people have too much of something and they don't have to think about being efficient, they stop thinking efficiently and then they approach things in an inefficient way. And this is, to me, a lot of the design issues with American everything, no matter if it's computing or roads or the way the houses and or commercial real estate's distributed. No one is thinking about things from an efficient and effectiveness framework. And it's really like, what's the most extravagant or what's the most ornate? And that's fine. But when that's the common approach to everything, then there's so much waste, and then it's like the most effective setups don't get used, and so we end up with this extravagant, ineffective, glamour filled, over engineered like landscape. And when people don't see any other alternatives, I think that's where it's like, oh, this must be the best because it's because of all the glamour and because of all the um, emphasis on extravagant uh, displays of, I don't want to call it progress or call it movement forward because it's not really what it becomes, but it's like these aesthetic explorations that have no function. And that's where it's one thing in fashion, but you can't really take that approach anywhere else besides fashion. And even in fashion, it's like when someone's making something so avant-garde.
I think I lost you there.
Sorry, I muted it.
Again.
Sorry. There's all these displays of wealth and extravagance that people end up making seem as if they're the pinnacle of growth and progress, but it's really just exorbitance, and it doesn't have any higher purpose than exorbitance. Which again, it's one thing if it's fashion, but that can't really be the case when we're talking about planning different chords for what people are going to use to connect to their computers for the next 5 to 10 years, and then change it 3 years in because the plan wasn't good and it wasn't modifiable. And that's where it's like, if people were able to change the USB outlets much easier, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, especially when we're talking about laptops. Like, laptops are easily some of the least modifiable machines when it's because they have to be engineered a certain way to fit everything in. But then that means people can't change out their USB ports.
Man, I remember like what I believe is the golden era of laptops. It was like the early 2000s because I remember having ThinkPads and Dells that and compacts and like all sorts of laptops that I was able to remove like optical bays and add second hard drives and easily access the RAM slots. Um, they were easier to take apart. Nowadays, computers are all thin as can be and like glued together. And if you take them apart, you're probably not getting them back together. And there still are some thick boy laptops out there that you can change some components, but like the vast majority of the stuff that I see, that like for the mainstream computing user, it's like the RAM is soldered directly to the board. The storage is built in. It's not user serviceable. You can't like clone your drive and put in a bigger storage solution. Like it's really it's tough for me because I've always felt like, yeah, I should be able to add a hard drive if I want to, and not an external drive because I don't care what anyone says. An external drive doesn't have the same kind of properties as a one that's connected directly, unless you have like a SAS connector or a SATA connector of some sort, or you're running some like, you know, something directly off the maybe Thunderbolt. But even then, you still have this peripheral that's hanging out next to your device on a cable. And that to me just seems like a bad idea. Like, of course, obviously, if it's mission critical, you're going to have a piece of hardware that has all this extra stuff built into it, so you don't have to worry about that kind of thing. But I, I don't know. I think that the trend of appeasing the person who wants a computer to be so thin that they can just slide it in their bag like it's a manila folder or a magazine, that is that's a strange concession. I don't care how big or heavy the computer is. It's going to take up space no matter where it goes. And like I don't want to compute on something that's just a little bit bigger than my phone or a little bit bigger than the typical tablet. I want a screen. I want to be able to see what I'm doing. Not have to like assume the computer posture of like hunching forward and craning the neck and getting the hands right up in there so your wrists hurt at the end of the day, because that's a horrible computing posture, and nobody actually wants to sit properly and or has a stand to get their laptop up so the screen is at the right height so that it can be like ergonomically positioned. I've never seen a desk that actually has that kind of feature built in for a laptop. Mobile workstations, yes, but not actual desks. Because people who work at desks have giant monitors typically, and they have a real laptop or a real keyboard and real mouse. And maybe that's the key, is that the laptop is just a supplementary device for like presentations and for casual computing, and the idea of like power usage on a laptop is kind of going away. Or maybe the things that were once power user level activities are just really easily handled by today's computer processors and GPUs, like way easier than in the past.
Well, and I don't know where power users exist much anymore in terms of they're being downsized out of studios.
Yeah.
The home power user, I mean, is it really only the people who are editing for YouTube now? I mean, and that's where I can't think of anybody who really hits power use anymore, because the computers become so powerful that unless it's somebody who's working at an airport using millions and millions of.
Oh, and yeah, and we're not talking about big studios that have like giant clusters of computers so they can render their entire CGI movie like that day so they can make their edits. We're not talking about them. Those are god level computing power. Normal people don't have that.
Well, and even those, that's where I'm saying, like, those are being downsized. So those clusters exist, but they're not as ubiquitous as they used to be, and they're not. No new ones are happening.
Yeah, but
So
like Pixar's computer system doesn't need to be upgraded for a while, probably.
right, but there's only one Pixar.
I know that's what I mean. Like Pixar or DreamWorks, they're not upgrading anything because they already have untold computing power, like unrealized computing power. They're still making amazing stuff with what they've got and supplementing it with newer technologies and new ideas. But I think a lot of that comes down to storytelling, and like animation itself is pretty well figured out. And so the machine is finely tuned. They can just churn those things out if they really wanted to. Maybe that's why mainstream computing is seeing all this push towards additional stuff to sell that might not actually be necessary, because computing power itself has reached this point where it's like the next the next evolution that we're all actually going to feel is a plateau that's a lot higher up than we're actually able to get to yet. Like we can imagine it, but how do we get to that place? And what does that place even give us? And do we even really need to get there? Does a normal person need to use that kind of computing power? Do we have the education system necessary in place to teach people how to use that kind of potential.
Well, and have people explored the things that have been created enough to necessitate creating new and better?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, because I don't feel like I've seen. I know I haven't seen all the movies that exist, and I'm constantly finding stuff, whether it's new movies or video games that came out and I missed them for whatever reason, and I go back and or TV shows or whatever, and I revisit it or visit it for the first time, and it's revisiting since it's not new. Um, and it's like, wow, this still holds up today, air quote, but it's because the idea of things getting better as time goes on is really kind of a fallacy that um I don't know if capitalism really created it, but it feels like it definitely marketed it and made it seem like that's what happens, just to ensure that people always buy the new updated version of whatever something gets put out, um as if the update makes it better. And this is kind of where the idea that it's somebody's job to just change an interface perpetually is like, oh, that shit is exhausting to me, because as soon as you get used to something in the layout, that person comes and changes it, or that team comes and changes it. And they're like, "Oh, we're just, this is just focus testing
You know,
to
this
see if."
this is all straight out of A Brave New World, where they've got generations and generations of future technology. They just can't release it yet because they have to recoup for all the R&D for the current generation and the next generation and the generation that follows. And people just aren't ready for the next generation of technology because they haven't exhausted this one. That's a good point, though. Like, how many times do they need to change, like, the settings menu system? How many times do we need a new control panel? And why can't I find the control panel without typing control? Why is it nested someplace and not obvious? Windows.
Well, and you can look at certain things and like a keyboard and mouse. It's ultimately, it feels like, I know people try new keyboard layouts and try new mice layouts, but there are a couple different types. Um, and then once the mechanical keyboards became a thing, then it was like, what else after that? LEDs. So there's not much
Multimedia
more,
controls.
right? There's not
Bells
much
and
more
whistles.
that a keyboard can be engineered, and so they haven't really, you know, wireless. Well, there's things that they'll keep adding on, little extra bells and whistles, but it can't go much more beyond, like, I think they tried to add a touch screen interface at some point on Apple, but it just didn't. Nobody used it because it was completely redundant to have a touch screen that wasn't the screen, but not part of the keyboard, and also have a mouse. So nobody ended up using it. So I think that's where there's a pinnacle of engineering and adding things, and I feel like a lot of areas have hit it and gone past it and not realized they can reverse and back up without looking like uh, a failure. But I think that's where all of these technologies were always experimental in the first place. And because they're on the market, it just felt like, oh, they must be tested and true because it's finally on the market. When in reality, the market is where things get tested. But that's not That's not how it feels.
I wonder when products started just being tested in the market before being finalized.
Well, I used to do game testing, and there was a marked point where the game testing stopped being play and it just started being questions about, if we took this out and made it DLC, would you buy the whole game? And it was basically, what could they strip from the game and make it DLC to not put out whole games at first, to then have a back end product that they could sell people, basically prepared out the gate. And I remember thinking like, oh, this is probably going to happen in every other industry too, where it's like, if you have a full product, if you can strip it down and turn it into a subscription where the people never actually end up getting the full product, or you get them the full product in pieces and sell it to them in pieces at overpriced, just to exploit every single dollar out of them possible. That was, I think it was around 2003, 2005. Um, and then I mean, I think music had a similar issue when they couldn't sell, $20 CDs, and everybody was stealing shit off Napster and LimeWire. And so they had to adjust their model. But then it was like, how do we get the most out of an artist? Well, if we make a bunch of singles instead of an album, then that's the way that they'll adapt, air quote, to this emerging landscape. And now you have artists that couldn't make an album that has an idea that is consistent throughout it, because they've never been trained to do that. They've never been rewarded to do that. They've never been even pushed in that direction. And then people are like, oh, music today is terrible. Well, it's not trying to do the same things as music was in the 70s or 80s even. And that's where, when people were making themed albums and they're trying to make musical ideas that were consistent across multiple songs, the idea of a single emerging from the album then started making it more difficult for people to grasp those concept albums. And so then concept albums started becoming less and less prevalent, because the audience wasn't able to grasp them. So it's this chicken and egg thing of, is the audience getting dumber because they're getting marketed to more, or is the marketing making them dumber? And obviously you can't nail it down to one thing per generation, because it's always coming from both sides. But I think marketing has removed itself from the conversation, such that no one's questioning why marketing is usually the biggest part of a movie budget. Or if a movie budget is $200 million, the marketing budget may be $195 million. And you're like, why wouldn't they just take that and make another movie instead, and let the movie market itself? But marketing has become such a prevalent part of the economy that we take it for granted. But in reality, that's because marketing is scamming every industry out of its capital, by making it seem like marketing is the most important aspect, even though really it's obvious the product's always the most important.
I wonder how much music today is actually music and how much is a commercial for something else in disguise. Like the music isn't even the product anymore. It's just part of the marketing. But it sounds so similar to real music that it can be put right next to real music, and the uninitiated listener would mistake one for the other.
Yeah, it's like they make it seem like Alien Romulus had a huge budget, but most of the budget was marketing. The film actually had an $80 million budget, but if you look up the numbers, it'll be like 200 million or 300 million or something, when in reality, most of that is fucking marketing. It's so infuriating. Meanwhile, I don't even, I mean, I guess I have good ad blockers, but I didn't see any of the marketing for it. I saw tweets about the popcorn buckets and shit, but I didn't see any direct marketing.
Wait, was there like some kind of chest burster that popped out of the popcorn bucket to like drench the thing with oil, with buttery oil?
They did, I think they did chest burster and xenomorph head popcorn buckets. And then they made a building where it looked like a giant xenomorph was like crawling on the building.
There was a popcorn bucket with a chest burster sticking out inside of Oh my goodness. Oh god, that's like a dick in a bag joke waiting to happen. How do they get away with that stuff? Let's put this violent creature that's an analogy for a, a, a penis inside of a bag of popcorn. That's a great idea. Assholes.
No, they're so creatively bankrupt that everything is a dick joke now. It was like the same thing with the Deadpool Wolverine popcorn buckets. Everything is a dick joke.
So were they trying to sell like mining colony life on Alien Romulus or something then? I'm not sure what they were trying to sell me with that movie.
Some Reeboks.
Oh, damn. You're right.
Yeah.
Alien Edition Reeboks. 99.99. 99. Brought to you by Wayland Utani Reebok.
It's like they don't get the fucking message from the movie. It feels so dystopian that a movie about the perils of capitalism becomes like a marketing ploy.
This is like the kind of irony that is usually like what's the word, cognitive dissonance inducing, I believe. That's where we are though. We're at a place that's we're already in a dystopian place where the marketing is taken over. There was a movie called Branded several years ago that was about this kind of thing where the marketing was represented by these parasites that were controlling everybody. It takes place in Russia. It's actually a pretty interesting sci-fi in the sense that like this marketing executive like loses his shit and eventually tries to reject it, and
I've never seen it, but I have a theory that toxoplasmosis won because it kind of disappeared out of the discussion. And it was at a point where they're like 25% of athletes have toxoplasmosis and 25% of Brazilians.
What? How, that's like a strange distribution. Athletes and Brazilians.
Well, it was because they have a ton of motorcyclists, and it was like associated with risky behaviors um, and aggressiveness. So it was, but then they were saying, oh, maybe that's why the Brazilian soccer team is so good or whatever. And that's why it was funny. The narratives about it were almost like Toxoplasmosis wrote this. uh, but it just kind of yeah disappeared out of the media discussion. I don't. Yeah, Brazil
Oh,
has
67%. Prevalence of toxoplasmosis is high, with one study ranking the country at 67% on the list of top 25 FIFA teams by toxoplasmosis rate. 25 outbreaks of toxoplasmosis in the last 50 years, including two of the largest outbreaks in the world.
up to 80% of the population of Brazil has antibodies to toxoplasmosis, which means they've been exposed to it.
Yeah, there's like up to a 0.3% congenital toxoplasmosis rate in Brazil.
But France has the most cases, 90% of all cases, followed by Poland and followed by the UK. And then it said 13 countries reported zero cases, which I'm like, no, that sounds like toxoplasmosis reporting that. Everything's fine here, nothing to see. There's absolutely no toxoplasmosis here. You mean not one in Bulgaria? Not one person?
Estonia,
It's
Iceland, Ireland, and Malta, apparently. But they have no screening policies or surveillance for congenital toxoplasmosis. Okay, Denmark,
yeah, nobody
Italy,
has COVID if you have
Netherlands,
no tests.
Norway, Portugal, and Sweden. Active surveillance includes Austria, Belgium, France, Greece, Slovakia, and Slovenia.
See, isn't it kind of sus that all the numbers stop? I guess they didn't. Yeah.
40 million people in the United States are infected with toxoplasmosis. Oh, wait, look at this. Flu-like symptoms, swollen lymph nodes, muscle aches, and pains. That just sounds like being alive.
Right. It's like anything, like, oh shit. And this is why WebMD is dangerous.
Let's see how to avoid toxoplasmosis. Number one, wash your hands. Number two, don't eat undercooked or raw meat. Don't eat raw shellfish. Wash kitchen utensils. Wash all fruits and vegetables. Don't drink unpasteurized goat milk. Don't drink untreated water. Cover children in sandbox. You know, these things just sound like things that everyone should be doing anyways. Those just sound like common sense. I mean, except for the kids' sandbox. I mean, I don't have a sandbox for kids. of toxoplasmosis and that was that fungus that takes over insects, cordyceps. If those things ever got together, they might be able to have a really serious party.
Well, one of the reasons, I mean, obviously the guns are out of control, but the shootings are happening so fast that it's like you can't even keep up. There was one today
Wait,
where I'm
really?
like, yeah, fucking obviously not a school shooting, but somebody like literally bought a fucking AR-15 this morning, 2,000 rounds of ammunition, and started shooting on I-75 in Kentucky. And so it's like when people are doing shit like that, I'm like, this must be brain worms. There is no rational explanation besides brain worms where people are doing this kind of shit so frequently. Um, where it's like it doesn't it doesn't even make the news anymore.
Oh, they found the weapon in a wooded area next to the interstate.
They haven't found the dude yet.
No, they found a vehicle and they found a weapon and some ammo.
Like there's
They're not sure why he abandoned the weapons.
but this is an active thing happening
They're
right
looking for this
now.
dude in the woods.
And yeah, meanwhile, it's not even like the main news story in America. It's it's like a weird fever dream to live in this country where everything is fucked up and it's like the government is not doing anything to make it better and they're only doing things to make it worse. And they're taking money and putting things towards things that make things actively worse. And then you're like, but I thought these were supposed to be Democrats. And they're like, we can't do it against the Republicans. And it's like, the Republicans are then like, we want to bring back slavery. And then there's all these just terrible things happening. And everybody's making it seem like they can't do anything to make it better while they actively do things to make it worse. So that's why I feel like America is such a cognitively dissonant country that creates more cognitive dissonance because we have to like wake up daily and engage with this shit and try to like not go crazy in this daily like you're doing your own thing while everything else is happening and you're aware of it where then there's a line where people decide to like engage in the zeitgeist with whatever they're attempting. And in that engaging in the zeitgeist, then the zeitgeist is effectively taking over whether you like it or not. And so there's this like weird cycle of information poisoning that's happening with Americans explicitly. And the ones that are engaging in rampant, mindless consumption, but also letting it rile them up, are creating these hostile environments where most regular people don't even want to engage anymore. But it's like the hyper volatile online, the places where people are always arguing, it's hard to escape them except back into the real world anymore. And I think those increasingly it's pushing people into the real world, because then once you go into the real world, you remember, oh, this people aren't actually like that. And the more you engage with the real world people, the less you want to engage with the hyper volatile online people, which may be bots, and you don't even know if they're even real people half the time. So I think that's like dead internet is becoming more and more abrasive, and I don't know how much longer regular people are going to keep. It's like you can only keep that as part of your daily routine as long as it's not ruining your day. And when people are letting social media ruin their days every single day, then eventually that's going to ruin the rest of their lives if they let it. And there's only so many people that can happen to before the pendulum swings the other way.
The number one local news is that the Lilly Library takes romance seriously with a new Love in the Library exhibition. IU Student Government Congress applications are due. Monroe Lake hosts a Salt Creek Valley History Week, but the thumbnail next to it is a advertisement for a Chevrolet dealership. This is all Google News. Where to buy IU gear in Bloomington. Oh, there's new availability for neighborhood residential parking permits. Man, Bloomington is so peaceful. That's local news here. Hey, where to go get your gear? Lane closures. I guess lane closures are important. Planting trees. Where to get donuts. Wow. This there's like absolutely nothing happening locally. I think that might actually be a good thing. It's like outdoor dining and parks and rec stuff, seafood dishes, tech district, family friendly restaurants. Kind of afraid to change my location somewhere else and that the news would change to something really bleak, but maybe it's not that bad.
Well, it's like you either cull your online experience to not be exposed to the worst, or it's constantly being inundated with the worst. And it's like there's no real in between. And so, on the one hand, there is a level of ignorance in censoring everything that equates to like putting one's head in the sand. But when everything is so dystopian and terrible, sometimes you actually need to do that to keep your peace and not go crazy. So I don't actually begrudge people who wash their eyes of anything that's something they shouldn't hold in their psyche if they're trying to just go about their day. Um,
I mean, like the only things that I really get rid of on Google News are from the entertainment and sports sections because I don't really, yeah, no recent articles in entertainment and sports. I've got morning after the mess around and find out from Black Heart Gold Pants. Okay, well I'll hide that because I really don't care about that. And Colorado football, I don't really care about that. I don't even know what Pack Insider is. I'm going to assume that onlygators.com is a football channel or website. Yeah. So I just get rid of that stuff and because I'm not interested in sports. I mean, I'll watch, some kind of display of athletics if I'm at someone's house and that's what's going on, but I'm not like actively trying to figure out like what happened at the big game last night. And then with entertainment, I prefer being marketed through like viral means for like my entertainment. I'd rather find out about it from somebody that I know or have it referenced in something else that I'm already reading about. Like, I learned that what is it? Lincoln Park has a new singer and a drummer because I was watching some video on YouTube. I don't even know what it was. And next thing I know, I'm watching a recent performance by a band with two new people, and it was like watching a nostalgia act of adults trying to channel like early 20s angst.
So is that all of your experience with that story?
Um, the Lincoln Park.
Because yes,
Um,
there's a good reason I'm asking this way.
I mean, I'm familiar with how their original singer died, or yeah,
No, 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 no. Okay, so
and I'm familiar with why their drummer is no longer with them. But
no, no, no. This is the internet moves so fast. So from the time that performance happened and people started realizing that Linkin Park had a new singer, well, the zeitgeist went and vetted this woman, and it turns out she's a Scientologist, and she also spoke up for Danny Masterson during his trial. And so within, I think it was like 2 hours or something of that performance, everyone had turned on her. And then within 8 hours, I think she came out and had to release a statement saying, I fucked up. I'm sorry. I supported Danny Masterson. I only knew part of the story. Sorry, I don't support him anymore. But the damage was done. And so that was like one of the biggest it was like a massive reception that turned into a massive like disposal
wow,
within 8 hours. And so
wow.
like by the time I woke up the next day, it had all happened and I had no idea it happened. And so I only saw like a meme of it where it was like showing the graph of like the process of Linkin Park coming out with a new song, people discovering the new person, and then discovering she's a Scientologist, and the Danny Masterson thing, and turning on her. And it's like this, by the like within 24 hours, it was already a meme. So that's why to me it's funny of how the zeitgeist moves, and it's like a fucking whirlpool that has like a like the drain is happening in the middle and things are spinning down the drain. As closer you get to the drain, the faster it spins. And it was like she went from the edge all the way to the center in like 8 hours and went down the drain. So it was this
Wow.
weird visual, like in my head, seeing it retroactively has it already happened. It's funny to then hear your experience coming from that side. Now, me filling in the gap, but also how that, like, there was a whole range of experiences that people had around this one event. And so it's funny, like,
Yeah, like not even getting
where
into
you,
her politics or weird shit she's been involved in. Like it was It was actually a very disappointing experience for me. And not that I was like a big Linkin Park fan when I was in high school. Uh, I enjoyed their music at the time, but it wasn't like my go-to for guitar sounds or modern music. It was just some new metal that happened to be on the radio. And so my attachment to those songs isn't, it's not like, oh, this is my jam. I'm going to rock out or I'm going to, get all angsty and kick some tires and light shit on fire. That's not that music for me. But listening to somebody that I'm unfamiliar with very clearly trying to sing with the original singer's voice. Like I didn't hear a new personality. I heard somebody trying to channel a dead vocalist. And it was really surreal hearing them sing about songs about like, being depressed is all else and seeing one of the dudes on stage singing with a big smile on his face. Like I think the song's like the Nothing Else Matters song or In the End or whatever it is. It's like the dude's singing a song and he's smiling about it. And these are like fucked up depression songs. It's very confusing. So that's when it was like, oh, this is clearly a nostalgia act at this point. You're not supposed to be like, I guess they're happy to be performing because they're a band and they want to perform, and that's totally cool. But it's weird to see performance of music that I had associated with a very painful delivery and performance by their singer, who is no longer around. I don't know. It's just there's nothing wrong with the nostalgia act because people who like bands, they want to keep on seeing them and they want to keep on having experiences with that music. And, more power to them. I like some old bands that aren't making anything newer, that are just probably touring the same music they've been playing for the last 20 plus years. That's fine. But most of those bands are either still intact or, no, they're still intact. Like, usually those bands, when someone dies, like, they stop.
Well, and I think one of the issues is why they kept the name. Um, but it's also there was a huge IP battle over the brand.
Hmm.
And so
Oh, so that's
they
like Alice in Chains and Stone Temple Pilots all over again.
it's kind of, yeah, in a sense of they fought really hard to get control of the IP because they didn't even like they there was like another, I think it was another band or something that had the name Linkin Park, or some other entity had the Linkin Park name trademarked before them. And so when they changed it to the way it's spelled and then also renegotiated their deal with their label, they also fought really hard to control the brand. So that's where, because they put so much money and effort into the control of the brand, it feels like they don't want to lose it and lose all of the things that it's built. But then that becomes a weird uh exploitative way to approach something that obviously it's never going to be the same because Chester's that. And it's like you can't ever recapture the same group. And it is in a similar, like other bands have gone through similar things where for whatever reason the lead singer or lead guitarist leaves, and so it's like, is the band the same? Is the band that one person? Like if Michael Jackson left the Jackson 5 and they replaced Michael with somebody else, could they still call themselves the Jackson 5?
I mean, if they
And
replaced
so
Michael with like Janet or Latoya, maybe.
it really becomes the band of Theseus at this
Yeah.
point. And that's kind of where, like, obviously it's not the same band, but the name has a meaning that people want to bring with that feeling or something. So it's like, I don't know if that's going to serve the brand in the long run. Um, but the fact that people are even talking about it, it obviously has revived the discussion and revived its importance into the mainstream because nobody was like talking about Linkin Park.
So I mean, okay. So Stone Temple Pilots singer Scott Weiland died, and then they replaced him with Chester. And then Chester died, and they replaced him with somebody else. And that band was started by the guitar player and the bass player. They were a pair of brothers, and so I can see why they want to keep their band going because they started it. It's not Scott Weiland's band. He just wrote a bunch of words and sang and did a great job, and is, you know, was an example of one of the great rock and roll singers who succumbed to drug abuse. And then similarly, like Alice in Chains, that was the guitar player's band, Jerry Cantrell. That was his band. And he wrote a lot of the words. He wrote all the music. And but there was a lot of contention over the rights to the music between the band and their singer's family. And they replaced Lane Staley with, I don't know the guy's name, but he's fantastic. He's a great vocalist. He's not Lane Staley, and I don't think he's trying to sing like Lane Staley. He's just trying to sing the songs. I know the Eagles have had a lot of contention over the rights to their music. The Beatles, Michael Jackson bought the rights to all of the Beatles music at one point. It's it's crazy how like the business of bands, it always seems to point just to the formation of, the star, because eventually the singers go solo. They leave their bands behind and they do solo work. But I don't think Geddy Lee could have left Rush and started a solo act and had anywhere near as much success. And I don't think that, we know that David Lee Roth, when he left Van Halen, he didn't have as much success. His best work was still when got accepted back to play with Van Halen. Um, I know there are a lot of people who really liked John Lennon's solo work, but I'm not really a big Beatles fan, and the only song of his that I know of is Imagine, which I'm so tired of at this point. I mean, for every singer out there, is there like a long forgotten band that they were with, like on their way to, through all of the changes to becoming who they are, or who they became once they, got to where they are? Is there like an entire whole ass band that got left behind in the process? Maybe that's
Yes.
maybe
This
that's
feels like P Funk in Parliament all over though.
yeah. I mean, like, uh, or P Funk and Funkadelic. Man, like but if that's the trend, that's of course the reason bands don't really happen the way they used to, because if the singers are always destined to, you know, I don't need you guys, I can go do this on my own, and then make pop music, then why not just focus on the pop music? Be a solo artist. And of course, then we don't have like the magic of multiple people contributing ideas to making something cool. But we're also we're well into the producer era where producers will take like the most basic idea. That's something that's not even a song, and then turn it into a whole song. I wonder how much contemporary music, like pop music, has like actual key modulation, not just like chord changes that are diatonic to a key, but like actually modulates to a completely different key. Or is that like, something from the old era of music? How far back do we have to go? Like the 70s? The 80s, maybe? I bet the 80s had some music that had key modulation.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I guess, it's funny on that same note, I don't really open the floodgates to new artists almost ever. And it's almost like uh, only if I hear somebody else playing something new. Like I was at the gas station and I heard somebody playing some shit. I was like, what the fuck is that? And so I asked him, I'm like, what are you playing? What song is that? And he's like, it's Larry June. And so if I discover new music like that, I'll try to deep dive on an artist to see if it's good. But then it's like very rarely does that pay off. So I think that's why it's much easier to stick with what you know. And like certain people, especially if you get a good rotation, you can keep playing like the same 20 songs over and over for months at a time. And then rotate, you know, other songs in and out. So it's like, a rotation of 20 songs or whatever, but it's really difficult to make sure that your mood isn't going to get fucked up somehow when you don't know like what you're going to hear, and if the music is going to be like abrasive or whatever. You're going to hear some shit where anymore it's like if I hear lyrics that are just like unnecessary. I mean, most rap lyrics are unnecessary, but if they're unnecessarily vitriolic, it's like I can't listen to this. There's no like I'm not about to go work out. I'm just trying to sit here and like chill for a minute. I'm not trying to hear somebody angry at the world about whatever and then directing it at somebody. Um and so I think the older I get, it's easier to identify when that shit's happening. And then it's like, I'd rather listen to an instrumental or the same song instrumental version and just get the unnecessary lyrics out of it. And so, uh, um, not to say I don't see the place for it, but in being more curative about my headspace, it's a lot easier to know that like a lot of the music is clutter. It's not, there's a difference between something being ornamental and something just being clutter. And a lot of this, back to the earlier part of the conversation, where something can look ornamental and it has all of the characteristics of something that's meant to be high high level aesthetic, but it's really like an imitation sheep version that just ticks off boxes and doesn't actually have the essence of what it means to be elegant. And so it's like plastic pearls from a distance look just like pearls, but when you get up close, they don't have the same qualities, they don't have the same characteristics.
That
And
luster.
one is obvious, yeah, the one's obviously a cheap imitation of the other. And so that goes with a lot of music, and it's just too much time to sift through the plastic pearls when you know you can go back to the good shit. That, it doesn't really get old. Like,
So I this is funny, like because of my highly focused interest in guitar, there is a substantial amount of heavy metal that I'm only aware of, like the guitar playthrough, where there are no lyrics. It's just the guitarist performing, demonstrating their performance for a song. And so, like Kiku Lorio, and this other guy like Andy James, and Chris Broderick of Megadeth. Like these guys have all released versions of their music that they wrote without the words, and that's how I'm aware of their music. And then I go and will listen to the actual song with the words, and it's like, whoa, what the did they do? What? This doesn't even make sense contextually. That kind of those kinds of reactions. And it's kind of funny to me because it seems like there's a lot of music that's being made, and they're like leaving space for a vocalist, but because that vocalist isn't actually part of that process of making the music, it's it's just a guest, and it's not even necessary. A lot of time, like instrumental, like metal, is standalone. It doesn't need words. It's got incendiary guitar work and really interesting chord changes, and everyone is playing, at you know peak level, full intensity.
so I think there's a marked point in rock and roll where now it's called classical or classic rock, but I won't say started, but the incorporation of symphonic structure and orchestral uh, organization to the the notation became more common. So you'd get these really technical, but not um, empty ornate, empty ornation songs where they're exploring different movements. Like they might have three different movements, sometimes five different movements in one song, multiple key changes, maybe multiple key changes within a movement. And then they'd have themes within the songs that, in a lot of cases, within mimic nature or uh, getting to the same, elements of mimicking Baroque, where it's it's almost like they're trying to elevate rock music, but at the time they're not calling it classic. That's just what they're doing. So it's like only in retrospect does it become classic rock because it's doing all these things at the time. And then the people who become purists get into heavy metal and get on the more technical, versus then the people who are all about the ornate go into hair and glamour. And so you have this stark contrast of when classic rock splits off into heavy metal versus hair and glamour. And that to me is like illustrative of almost everything that's happened in American economies, and that like inability to weave the two together is why it becomes I don't know, maybe I'm saying this wrong. Maybe it's not easy to weave those two together. So then when someone does it well, that's why they stand out, rather than assuming like assuming if one can be done and the other can be done and weaved, but maybe that's the wrong assumption. And so the result is like, I think when you get the elite in uh their own genre, then there'll be a few people who ascend above the genre and become outstanding in their own right beyond what that genre is. And a lot of times that has to do with image, but the talent still needs to be there in almost every case when it comes to music.
Yeah.
Uh,
I see it all the time when I'm watching some video of some phenomenal guitar performance. There's always some heckler in the comments that says something to the effect of like, too many notes, play with some soul or feeling, and I'm always left feeling like, I bet that person can't even play this song. And it's really interesting because I think that there's like a I think that there's a lot of insulating one's own ego in within all of this stuff, within music especially, like, and I think that the people who are best at it are the ones who don't have to insulate their ego because their ego is intact. I think that's part of the reason that it's so difficult to manage, like what we were saying, like, ornamentation and technical mastery and expression, and to meld them all into one cohesive thing, is that it's not easy. I think it's actually one of the hardest things to do. Creativity is easy. That's the easy part. But putting it together into a package, that's actually the hard part.
yeah, I think that's where people perpetually take execution for granted, and that's why they think ideas are valuable. Um,
Man, I've got so many ideas. I wish I I'm serious. Like, if ideas were valuable, I would have all of I would have it all the resources. But ideas are easy. Ideas are so easy. We can think of anything we want to. We have brains. How do we package it? How does that's I think that's the thing that marketing has really done to us. It's packaged things in a way that tricks people into being convinced that they need that thing. Like for a couple of weeks, I was convinced that I needed a tuner, like a high performance instrument tuner, something that's accurate down to the cent. And I don't. I have really intact hearing, and I can hear modulation of harmonics still. And so I don't actually need to use a tuner for anything except like the most critical of tuning needs, like setting intonation on a guitar, because that's a very precise thing that you got to set. But even then, I can get really close. I think I can keep up with most tuners. It'll take longer, of course, because I'm not a machine. I don't have a piece of quartz in me that has a strobe running through it to keep it locked into sync. Like, that's not. but but yeah, I mean, for a while I was convinced that I needed another device that I don't need, because I watched some video about somebody talking about sweetened tunings and tuning the guitar, like basically like tempered tunings. So tuning a guitar around a chord or a certain portion of the neck, so that that performance in that portion of the neck sounds better, sweetened. And it turns out that all that does is it makes it really sound really good in one position, like 5 to 7 frets, but then everywhere else on the guitar's neck is kind of really out of tune, unless you re-intonate for that sweetened tuning, and then it will definitely only play in that position. And of course, the reality is, I don't want to dedicate any instrument to playing in one position or in one key or one specific tuning. That's like And it's not like I have a shortage of instruments, but like I still wouldn't want to do that. But marketing, it worked on me. I wonder now I'm curious of like if I hadn't deleted my YouTube history, I could go back and find that video and go back to the and like try and pinpoint the moment when they got me. And I know that like we're in the season of releasing new stuff because what is it? We're less than 3 months away from the big holiday when everyone buys things for the sake of buying things, and so they have to release stuff in time so that people can say, "Oh, I want that. I'm going to start socking away my coins." And yeah, sure. So that makes sense. But there was another something that I normally wouldn't be interested in. A really tiny desktop amplifier that can run off batteries and also has a Bluetooth speaker. And I don't need a Bluetooth speaker, and I don't actually take my guitar, out into the wild where I would need a battery powered amplifier. What problem does this solve for me? Obviously, none. Except for having a really tiny amplifier that I can play really quietly in the middle of the night and not wake anyone up. But my entire life, headphones have always been good enough, so this doesn't actually solve a problem for me. Marketing's getting really good, man, and they're like convincing me that I want things that I actually don't have a problem to
Wait,
solve.
can you plug headphones directly into your guitars?
I have one
Okay.
guitar that I can do that.
That's pretty cool.
Um, but otherwise, I run it through a preamp. I have a Line 6 Helix that does all the things. Actually, my actual guitar amp has a headphone output. I have I think it's not a reactive load. It's an impedance based load box for my tube amp that allows me to run it without a speaker load, which is normally catastrophically bad. Melt your output transformer doing that, and fry your power tubes also. Never run a tube amp without your speaker cabinet providing a load to the power section. But anyways, I have a load box for that I can run without a speaker and plug headphones into. If I really want to listen to it, if I really want to run a space heater while I practice the guitar in the middle of the night, I can do it, but I don't. I have that so I can record it. My bass amp has a headphone output, although listening to the bass through headphones is like very unsatisfying. You gotta have some really serious headphones if you want to be able to really enjoy that like fundamental pitch, that low frequency that a bass produces. Or like you've got a solution because you've got an acoustic electric, and that has a giant resonating box attached to it to allow you to achieve that stuff. But like an electric bass that doesn't actually have a resonating body through headphones is so unsatisfying to me.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. It feels like it would sound really flat.
I mean, the bass is one of those things. Like if I can tune most guitars free air with other sounds going on in a room. I'm pretty good at that. Occasionally, I might have to get like my chin on part of the body so I can feel it through my jaw. But the bass, I can't even put my ear on the body and hear it and tune it because those frequencies are all so close to each other. Like some of them are only a few hertz away from each other, and so hearing that kind of modulation with no amplification is just not easy. It's doable. Like if the room gets real quiet, like if I'm sitting in a room, there's no fans on, and there are no cats or dogs walking around. I've got like absolute peace and quiet. I can probably get it tuned up using harmonics, but there's no hearing the fundamental of the low E on an unplugged electric bass. Like
Right.
it,
Yeah. I mean, you're not gonna hear it
it's
at
just
all.
you're only feeling a little bit of resonance and maybe like upper harmonics, but even then, it's just not satisfying. Acoustic
Well, and
instruments are
that's
different
where
though, because they
this
make their
one
own sound.
has it has a built-in digital tuner.
Yeah,
So
so I've noticed that in the last like decade or so, acoustic electric instruments have they start including the tuner in the guitar. Oh, that's ingenious.
yeah, right. It's like you would think, oh, this is obvious, but the fact that they only started doing it recently, but then the fact that they're doing it is like, oh, this is the coolest shit ever.
I mean, seriously, that's like one of the best corporate decisions that's actually ever been made. That's actually one of the best they've ever made, including a tuner. That's like game changing practically. Like, hey guys, you don't even have to add a tuner to your gig bag anymore. Got it built in. Now, if they could only get that tuner built into an electric guitar to run off of the pick of the load provided by the amplifier's front end, so no battery, and just run it off of that really low, like puny voltage, that would be the stuff. I'm sure it already exists, and I'm just not aware of it.
Yeah, they seem to be making more accessible, more portable gear that's not necessarily for playing in front of a large crowd, but also for playing with people.
Yeah.
Like, I'm seeing more people play over Zoom with each other, which is where there's like a setting you can do for musicians on there, which I thought was pretty cool, and it reduces the latency to near zero.
Oh, I bet they're using like
Uh,
a UDP stream, like for
yeah,
broadcast. That's cool.
yeah, it is really cool.
That's really
Um,
cool.
because that's where the only reason I even looked it up is because I saw people on YouTube doing like they were playing over Zoom together, but there's also people who like edit their shit together.
Yeah.
So those aren't the same, but yeah, to be able to like play over Zoom is pretty cool.
Well, I know that Herman Lee, the one of the principal songwriters for Dragon Force during pandemic, during the first wave of the pandemic, I guess, he'd been working on this Jason Becker project. Jason Becker is a guitar player who suffers from ALS. He's a phenomenal guitar player when he was able to play. Now he's like bedbound. Still writes music, but has other people perform it. And he was like a, you know, monumental neoclassical guitar virtuoso, inspiration to many, heralded as one of the greats, but just his abilities were stripped from him too soon, kind of thing. But so Herman Lee was just interviewing every guitar player that he could, and like some of them and all of them over Zoom. And then at some points he would put on this backing track and be like, "Hey, show us what you got. Let's jam." And they would. And I couldn't figure out what was going on because it's like there's always so much inherent latency. Like the most stable, the best, most stable data connections that I've ever experienced have always been like business class internet because they maintain a higher quality of service. But even those had enough latency that actual real-time communication was still stuck behind a buffer somewhere. There's always enough. There was always enough latency just in the route from one computer to the other that 32 milliseconds of latency is a lot. Like that's huge. That's
Oh yeah,
delay.
that's a lot. I mean,
That's delay.
especially if you're trying to play a game.
I mean, just trying to play two people playing instruments at the same time with 32 milliseconds of latency. That's a lot. So how did they get around it? So yeah, I think whatever you stumbled upon must be that same kind of technology, because even even our Zoom session right now has latency.
Well, and it definitely has latency to YouTube, which is funny in that I think it's like 3 seconds or so. I don't know the exact latency.
We've got a 2 second keyframe interval between us and Restream, and then I think that there's another like 8 to 10 seconds of delay between Restream and YouTube. Plus whatever inherent latency that Zoom introduces. Plus the 6 milliseconds of latency on the audio interface.
So this is crazy. You can use live performance mode up to 50 people.
Whoa!
Yeah, but that's where they cut it off. Oh wait, 5 people can perform at the same time,
Okay,
but
okay.
then only 50 can even be in the performance. Yeah, that's crazy. So that because it's like they limit the bandwidth to 48 kilohertz, or the sample rate, sorry. Um and so yeah, if five people, yeah, that is basically like one really high quality audio file if it's like cumulative, or if they're all sharing the same amount of sample, like
Well, I mean,
if it's parallel sampling.
typically, like I'm pretty sure a pro level Zoom is limited to 100 people. And so if we take it down to 50 and 5 performers, that's just like giving those 5 performers 10 times the bandwidth.
Well, I thought they had like 200,000 people or something on a call.
I think those people can watch it, but I'm pretty sure that there's
Oh, you're talking about participants.
yeah, there's a 100 participant cap on a normal pro Zoom session. I think they might have changed it. I haven't looked in a while. So if that's the case, and they drop the number of actual participants down to 5 or 50, but only 5 get full bandwidth, that's still within 100, I guess. But if it's UDP stream, then the people who are observing don't actually participate. They just need to see the outbound stream, and they could feasibly host as many as they need to within reason. Depends on what kind of like audio quality they're streaming, though. If it's like you're
Well, and this
saying,
is where. Sorry, go ahead.
oh, if it's like you're saying, if they're getting like, you know, up to 10 times the bandwidth than of normal, then that's more than enough to carry an HD audio stream. And especially if they're limiting it to 48 kilohertz, then they're only using half of an HD audio stream.
On that note, this is where a lot of streaming services are reducing the quality of their, whether it's video or audio streams, unless you turn it up. So they're saving money on people who don't perceive that their audio has or video has been lowered in quality, and they're not using the most bandwidth intensive versions of those media.
It's funny to me that like HD is like 96 kilohertz and 24 bits, and really truly HD audio is actually 192 kilohertz at 24 bits. But there are still people out there who think that vinyl is the best, which we can completely capture at 32 kilohertz and like 12 bits. Like HD audio is at moderate levels is still like 3 times the resolution and twice the bit depth of a record. And full HD audio is like 6 times the resolution and twice the bit depth. So maybe there is some logic in reducing the bit depth on a streaming service. Like MP3 has always cut everything off at like 1500 kilo or 50 yeah 15 kilohertz. Sometimes a little bit less depending on how aggressive the filters are. And like I mean, I think the logic with that decision was nobody can hear anything up there anyways. It's all just whistles and chirps. You know, the great irony is that a lot of hi-fi audio equipment is designed to reproduce well into like 100 kilohertz, and at really high sensitivities too, like just truly sensitive hardware. And yet there are people who listen to that on that kind of hardware and espouse the virtues of spending untold amounts of money on a preamplifier. Will listen to a piece of vinyl that can't even actually produce frequencies above 17 kilohertz or 16 kilohertz. And then they'll talk about how like they're hearing, you know, musical information that the engineers couldn't even hear, like musical information that can't actually exist on the medium it's being stored on. I don't know about you, but I actually don't mind the artifacts. I like having super high resolution audio playback systems because then I can hear all the weird artifacts. And then you do get to sometimes you can like get the weird ghosts in the medium, like if it's a vinyl transfer or if you're listening to something that was actually a tape transfer and it has a lot of information in it. It also captured a lot of other information. But even then, like the ghosts in the music, I don't know if those things. I don't think those are actually intentional. I think that's just like, you know, happy accidents type thing, and I think that's also part of the magic in it. And these things aren't like beholden to the analog realm. There are plenty of artifacts that exist as a result of digital process and digital realm. Actually, in the last year, I've been making efforts to minimize my the time I spend in the analog realm in terms of making music. And it's really because most of the times that I want to do things in the analog realm, there's actually a modern simulation of that kind of process that is every bit as good, if not better, with infinite recall, and I can save time and save presets. I think that's actually part of it is that the simulation has become so good that like the only need to do things in with the real thing would be because it's in front of you, because it's there.
Well, and again, this gets back to the notion of, do we really need super high resolution streams for talking head TV shows or for, you know, sitcoms? And I don't think so. And it's the same for music that isn't super technically constructed. I
Yeah,
mean,
if it's not super high resolution to begin with, like we know that you can't interpolate from what's not there. This has like been the standard for computing since, you know, the beginning of let's try and remaster stuff or enhance things. Unless you're really into observing like film grain level detail in your 4K copy of insert now ancient black and white movie. You want to observe the actual condition of the film that was scanned. I guess that's a thing. I want the scan to be so accurate that I can see like imperfections in the lens. But we can actually simulate that stuff. We can simulate every lens effect or lens look reliably, repeatably, control the amount of flare in the scratches, the specular highlights that form in the scratches of the lens, the virtual scratches in the lens, and how that would translate onto film. All of these things can be modeled without having to rent, like a now ancient camera that nobody knows how to use with lenses that are worth more than most people's houses because they don't you can't even find replacement parts for these lenses. They'd have to be like custom machined.
So that's one of the coolest parts about college campuses that have
All that stuff.
studios and all that stuff that's available to the students where, I remember going to the library and renting an HD camera in like 2005 where you're like, or you can get a boom mic or a fucking field mic.
Yeah, they had
And
those like
it's like all this technology
yeah,
available
they had
that you
those
could just take out.
$6,000 Canon HD cameras that you could
Hmm.
just sign your name and let them scan your ID, and they here you go. Here's $10,000 worth of hardware. Don't break it.
But it was like, I remember learning that we could do that and then realizing that I basically not done it for the first 3 years. And then it was like, it was like a whole new world opened up to me in terms of what I could create and what I could do. But it was always there and I just didn't know it. And so that's why it's interesting to me to see like these these places often exist and then people don't really know they exist for whatever reason and they don't access them. And then it becomes this gap of like it almost seems like magic when people can create things. And then that's why these people who then never access those spaces want to then come in and use AI to skip over all those steps. But it's funny to see the end result. You can't skip steps when it comes to execution. And so that's why on the one hand, I know we have to suffer through all of the AI experimentation, but I know they're just never going to get to a point where it's like it's never going to be more impressive than what a human is able to do on creativity and restriction. And I think that's why like yeah, AI will never be able to make Alien Romulus on a tight budget. A human can make Romulus on a tight budget, but AI, no, it needs trillions of dollars. It can't do what a human can. And so in the face of that, I'm just like waiting to get through all of this hype and rhetoric in the same way that like now that we're past the hype phase in crypto and blockchain, all of the actual use cases are emerging, regardless of how few or how many there are. It's like we've gotten past the hype phase. And so now it's like, does it work? Does it work for what it is claiming to work for? And that's all that matters. Whereas with AI, it's all about the hypotheticals and what it can be. And that we just can't stay in that phase forever.
I think that's there's I'm convinced there's some musician out there who downloaded some very entry level, capable of generating its own models, AI that they can self host, and they're training it themselves, and it's only going to know what they've shown it, and they're training with like content that they generate themselves. I'm sure that that person exists, and whether or not they're actually able to make it do something cool or not is, to be determined, obviously. Um, but I'm actually rooting for that person because that's a massive undertaking, and if they succeed, that it could be really interesting, and it could also really just be really bland. But I'm gonna be optimistic and hope that that musician is willing to, you know, take it all the way. Because I think that might actually be interesting. And I'm, I'm not really into the AI offerings that I've been exposed to thus far. Like none of it really makes me say, "Oh man, I got to go out and integrate this into my process. My workflow needs this." Um, but from what I know about how generative AI works, there is potential if it's like cultivated properly, and not just like handed over the entire repository of like a labels archives, because that's just cheating. I don't think it's going to have the same kind of impact on a genre of music that like Aphex Twin did on electronic music when he emerged. But I think it definitely is going to happen. We just it's just not going to happen out in the on the front. It's not going to be the mainstream thing. It's just going to be like a bullet point on, whatever music radar or Synthopia or one of those kind of sites. I mean, that's generally how that stuff works. I remember like Boss released a guitar synthesizer that was based off of some technology that Roland had been developing, and it was really cool. It was, but it was just a sound box. It just made the guitar sound really different, but because the guitar is so intrinsically, um, tied to the way it's performed, like it didn't actually perform like a synthesizer. And when I would set up a patch to have more synthesizer like behavior, it didn't play like a guitar. It played like a synthesizer, which was really weird. And I think that might come down to like the method that I learned of dialing synthesizers in. Um, but yeah, and eventually I sold it because I just wasn't really into it. Um, but I'm sure there's somebody out there who figured out how to use that thing, and I'm just not aware of it because there are, at least 10,000 of those units were made and sold, maybe more. They made an SY 1000, which means they did well enough with the 300 to keep going, or the, yeah, by 700 maybe. Yeah. But again, I think that's also like a reflection of technology. Like there have been a lot of different interfaces for computing that have been attempted, and some of them work for some people and some don't work for very many people. Like the few people that I've known who are able to adopt Dvorak keyboards, they can type faster than anyone I know. Um, but it's a very limited number of people that I know who have a Dvorak keyboard, and like the number of people that I know who are aware of Dvorak but don't have the keyboard, that's like a fraction of the people who actually have the keyboard. So And I've only met a few people in my life who learned how to type on like AZERTY, which I'm is my understanding is a right hand dominant keyboard layout, which is interesting because it means that everyone who is educated in QWERTY is educated in the left hand dominant layout.
Yeah, that's true.
Despite like a society that places so much emphasis on right handedness, I think the whole right handed left handed thing is a really weird trap.
It's a limitation that people then never break out of. In
Yeah,
that, like, yeah, if you think of yourself as ambidextrous, you're not gonna only play pool left-handed or only play pool right-handed or whatever.
yeah.
Like being able to switch hands with the pool stick gives me so much more capacity on the table.
I bet it's a big mind fuck for whoever you're playing with if they have never seen you do that before. I bet the person that sees it, they're like, "Wait, what's going on?" And you're like, "Oh yeah,
Well, it's just so normal to me, but the idea that like some people only play with one hand, it's I can't fathom it. And that's where again it's like I don't know if it's because of the piano or
yeah." There's no left-handed piano.
right. I mean, but at the same time, the right hand usually carries the melody, which is why ragtime is a thing. And so the right hand carrying the melody in a lot of piano songs is or in a lot of piano music is uh it's like yeah, it's not a right-handed instrument, but you have a lot of right-handed people or people who are raised right-handed writing music and the melody staying in the right hand and never touching the left.
I bet a lot of that comes from early melodic instruments having very limited range and being high pitched, like flutes. Basically, whistles, multi pitch whistles. I'm sure that somebody, tuned an early xylophone, some like bells, but I bet those were pretty high pitched too.
Well, and it seems to be cumulative theory in that it happens around the same time
Yeah,
drum
everywhere.
sets and more percussive accompaniment emerges. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I was talking to someone about this and I was saying like I just gravitate towards towards instrumentals that have drum sets and more percussive adhesion, and they were like piano is a percussive instrument, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
like
got
that's very
hammers.
true. So is a xylophone, but a xylophone isn't going to get the same feeling as a drum set, and so that's where on the one hand it's like I think because it's not like drums don't have tones either, but it's more um rhythm that's less focused on the tone that a drum set can do that pianos can't really
Yeah.
do or a xylophone
And there
can't
and there
really.
are outliers like tablas that have like vocal ranges.
Right.
And but
Yeah.
that's really different. Or talking drums, like that's a very different thing because that's like a person is like tuning the skin in real time as they're performing, and that's like that's like quantum drumming. That's multi-dimensional drumming. I think that's the thing that synthesizers actually give us is the ability to like adjust the timbre in real time in a way that's very unnatural. That's like that seems to be superhuman. And then it's funny because then there are groups like Daft Punk which do everything they can to make electronic music sound like disco funk, like or disco and funk at the same time, going so far as to perform with like Pharrell or and like Stevie Wonder, and which is awesome. That's I think that's as close as we're ever going to get to seeing the robots making music like humans is Daft Punk, and it's actually a couple of French dudes wearing costumes to look like robots. I don't even think that AI can replicate real electronic music, even though a lot of computer music is made with machines. They might be able to emulate the sound. They might be able to fake a lot of the conditions that arise out of electronic music, like the anxiety or the intensity or the blissed out stuff. They might even get the timing right, but I don't think that AI is ever going to know why it's doing those things. I don't think it'll ever know when.
Can't even read. It just mimics reading.
Yeah.
So that's why it's like the stupid people being tricked by natural language, thinking that it's doing something complex. It's not to oversimplify what it's doing, but it's not doing what it appears to be doing. And it's tricking people and making them think that it's one thing when it's completely different. And that's why it's frustrating to me in that it doesn't really help. There's like, I still have yet to really see somewhere where it actually helps.
The weirdest...
even,
go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, even the code stuff where it's like, oh, it can help me write code. Well, it'd actually be cheaper to have an assistant. Yeah.
So this is one of those things that gets me. Music is composed of sounds that we hear with our ears, and language is comprised of sounds that we hear with our ears. But tokens are comprised of text, of strings of characters that are entered with fingers that don't actually have their own sound. They're characters associated with a sound. And so the tokens, which are then generated by some kind of statement, I want a 16 bar audio loop that sounds like blah 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 and whatever. All of those tokens are then selected, and then the neural net does its neural net thing and like spits out something, and it might sound cool for the first half of it. The whole thing might sound really cool if it's less than 30 seconds. It's probably not usable for anything because it's probably not actually in a key, but that's, AI doesn't know that. It's up to us to figure that stuff out. I just don't think that even with the best prompter, I don't think that it's possible to make sounds happen by providing a computer tokens that are just strings of machine code that are supposed to represent sounds referencing something else. It's such a pretzel of shoehorning, and I don't know how many other things can I fit in this to try and describe a system that's just convoluted beyond reason to do something that's natural and actually not difficult. I'm still trying to figure out when Google's going to explain why I need an NPU in my system when Google has worked fine for me for the last 20 plus years, or however long Google's existed. Search engines have worked just fine for the last 20 plus years. I haven't had problems finding things. Why do I need an NPU or a TPU?
No one knows.
No one.
Good stuff, man.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was random.
I really need to change the this thing. We don't work with Catalyst TV.